Hello everyone, and welcome to my Minecraft World Showcase of Whitechapel. And we find ourselves today on the Peabody Estate, which was built in 1875.
Oh, whoa, no, hang about. Hello there, my name is Lord Cliff, and I'm a Victorian policeman, and I am here to put right your wrongs and correct your ineffectual, incorrect, erroneous, apocryphal statements. Now, let me tell you, right this very second, that in 1876, the Metropolitan Board of Works purchased the land around you right now for slum clearance. Do you know what that is, young lady?
When they no longer want the slums, so they can get more money from bigger houses and richer tenants.
That is thereabouts correct.
Yes.
So, this scheme was highly expensive. The board intended to sell the land on, but since no other organisation could find any commercial value in doing so, the land went untouched for years. However, by 1879, the Peabody Trust, an American charity organisation, had purchased the land. Now, by 1881, the land clearance was completed and 287 flats had been built.
I see.
Now, young lady, can you tell me what the houses around you are constructed from?
The houses are constructed from wood.
Which is factually incorrect, for they would have indeed been built from brick, just like this.
Wow.
Behind you. Here. If you look over here, there you go. Just like this.
Wow.
Now, these houses had unplastered walls so that lice could not attempt to preside within them. They also came equipped with bathrooms, toilets, and a yard.
Nice.
And it improved, ultimately, ventilation from the past houses. However, these buildings were pleasant, but more expensive, though still cheap for the area. Still too expensive for the previous tenants to come back. Why do you think that is?
Because they built more expensive houses.
Yes. And also because the people living here didn't
what, my friend?
Didn't earn much money. The lower wages might only earn between 6 and 12 shillings a week. This was scarcely enough to pay the rent.
I see.
So then, that is all we have to say of the Peabody Estate.
Why don't we take a look inside of the tavern?
Yes, of course. Why?
Because...
tavern. Tell me about what it is you believe about this tavern.
Well, I have heard that gangs used to offer protection of the taverns and pubs for money. However, if they declined, they would smash up the pub, and then, therefore, they would have to get someone to protect them from smashing it up again.
Yes, just like this, look.
Wow.
This is known as a protection racket. The gangs in London controlled vast swathes of territory.
Amazing.
It did not come cheaply. These gangs would demand extortionate prices from local shopkeepers to remain loyal to that gang.
I see.
Which raises the question, why didn't people just leave Whitechapel?
Because they were too poor to leave.
Precisely. Finally, you're learning. Good employment was not readily found.
I see. And is that why people had to live within the confines of a lodging house, my friend?
Why? It is indeed. Tell me, what are the conditions in this lodging house like?
Well, there are many a bed, which they used to pay a tiny amount of cash for per night. However, they all used to be crammed into a small building, and the conditions were not very good. Par example, there is a bucket where all the human excrement goes, which then would go out of the window.
Well, this water, young madam, is extremely pellucid, given that it is full of rancid, fetorous, stinking feces. Don't you think?
Very nice.
Yes. Anywho, in 1883, A clergyman who visited the East End wrote a pamphlet by the title of The Bitter Cry of Outcast London.
I see.
Andrew Mearns, the aforementioned clergyman, was worried that overcrowding and unhealthy conditions would spread criminal behaviour.
Ah.
This meant that lodging houses and pubs were seen as places in which crime would be transmitted from habitual criminals to the decent people forced to live alongside them.
Ah.
Because a popular idea at the time was known as phrenology. Can you tell me what that is, miss?
Unfortunately, I cannot.
Phrenology, young miss, is the ideal to which many of us young, up-and-coming Victorian policemen like to quote often at a time.
Ah.
Phrenology describes a genetic mental disorder. It describes essentially the criminal classes and how it is that people are born to be criminals rather than raised to be.
I
It
see.
also describes, of course, the contritions of the brain and how it is that the criminal mind operates and works. So it was often believed that not only would criminal sentiments be passed on, but the actual shape and format of the mind of the people living in these lodging houses and in these poorer areas would in fact become malformed.
I
And
see.
suffered deep malcontritions to the extent that they could no longer think coherently, and their criminal mind would be passed on to their children.
Ah.
Now, where to next?
Why don't we take a look at the police station?
Ah, my favourite. Whereabouts?
Where are you?
Pardon? Oh, right, okay.
I'm at the police station.
As am I.
Ah. So,
well then, young man.
being a police officer yourself, you should know
Yes,
a lot
of
about
course.
this.
I do know an awful lot about this. Now, you as a young prostitute might come to me. Tell me, what is your problem, young prostitute madam?
I have been abused.
You have been abused.
Oui.
Well, that is unfortunate, for in Whitechapel, for every 300 citizens, there was only one policeman. So it's actually unlikely that we might be able to deal with your case individually. However, in circumstances like that of Jack the Ripper, the entirety of the police force was deployed due to public fear in the media.
I see.
Prostitution in this time, you'll be glad to hear, young prostitute, was not actually a crime at this time. However,
it was illegal to buy the sex from a prostitute.
Well, no, it was illegal to run a brothel.
Yeah, same thing.
I'm afraid, you stupid.
No, I'm sure
fool.
It was both.
You moron.
I'm sorry, Lord.
Idiot. Christ. Yeah, because from 1885, owning a brothel was illegal. Now, there's a little joke. Don't go in there. Don't go in there. There's a little joke we like to tell in the police force. Would you like to hear it?
Yes, please.
Some people call prostitution the oldest profession.
Tee-hee.
It's a good one, don't you think?
I do think. How about we visit the rookery?
No, not yet. There are more facts about prostitution you must learn and must know of.
Okay.
Would you like to hear one of them?
Yes, please.
Many women would turn to prostitution due to their alcoholism. In fact, the majority of Jack the Ripper's victims were alcoholics, and all of Jack the Ripper's victims were drunk at the time of the murder.
Ah. That's mental.
There's another little joke we like to tell in the police force. Would you like to hear it?
Yes, please.
Okay, here we go. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Policeman.
Policeman who?
You've been nicked, sunshine. You're under arrest.
Oh.
Thank you for allowing the police to legally enter your home and arrest you.
Oh, take me away. Well, let's visit the rookery.
Oh dear.
Now, police officer, what do you
Yes.
know? What do you know of the rookeries?
They often weren't made of wood.
Yes, they were. Don't lie.
Some would have been constructed from wood, but others less so.
I see.
In fact, the great city of London was primarily constructed from newer material. Well, where are you?
I'm within the rookery.
Oh, I see. Have you entered one of the houses?
Yes, there's a very starving, famished old man in here.
I can't. How do I enter your compartment? How did you get in?
I went in through the ceiling. You see.
Oh.
All right.
All right. The police officer will be down there in a second. Oh,
I'm back. Yes.
Yeah, jolly good. Okay. Right. So you want me to talk about the rookeries?
Oui.
Well, tell me, what do you think of the rookeries?
They were very poor, overcrowded streets in Whitechapel, which had up to 9 people living in every house, which may have only been one room.
Indeed. Might I tell you, young madam, a story about Flower and Dean Street?
Yes.
The notorious rookery in 1870 were Flower and Dean Street.
Ah.
One historian, Jerry White, used the 1871 census to work out that there were 902 lodgers staying in 31 of the doss houses on this street alone. Some of these houses date back to the late 1600s, and they were in a terrible condition. Their yards, not shown here.
I see.
Their yards had been built over to provide more rooms, and at the front, the street was narrow. Only 16 feet at its widest part in the middle. There were outside toilets, but buckets and pots were used indoors and often spilled. Some lodgings were more settled, but families moved on after a few days or weeks, perhaps because they couldn't afford the rent, or because they moved to find other work. Because of the worst doss houses, Flower and Dean Street had a terrible reputation as a haunt of thieves, drunkards, and prostitutes, which most certainly did not help with the public misconception of the criminal classes.
Ah. How about we visit the courthouse?
Indeed. Hello.
Hello.
Would you like to stand before the judge?
Oui.
And we can talk about anti-Semitism. So, so, oh no, no! I had a bout of madness. I think my game might be a tad broken. Okay. Right. Tell me, young miss, what is anti-Semitism?
The ideology of being against the Jewish race.
Oh, right. Actually, yeah, no, that's right. Sorry. So, anti-Semitism was common at the time. Between 1871 and 1881, it is predicted that an estimated 30,000 Eastern European Jews moved into London, particularly and notably in Whitechapel, where the prevalent population of Eastern European Jews. I misspoke. Oh no.
Continue.
I apologise. Yes, the population was particularly prevalent in Whitechapel due to its proximity to the docks and the potential abundance of work. And of course, as more Jewish peoples moved into Whitechapel, it became a more likely zone for further Jews to move in. Can you imagine why?
Because it was their community.
Precisely. And they would often offer one another jobs. Newspaper reports also contain stories of crimes and attacks carried out against Jewish people. In most of these cases, the victim's religion was not the cause of the assaults, which often happened during robberies. However, some Jews were targeted because of their religion.
I see.
There was indeed conflict between Jews and Christians. There were some reports of conflict between people because of their religious differences. In October of 1878, an article in the East London Observer covered a disturbance outside St. Mary's. There is a tradition in some forms of Christianity that Jesus would return to the earth when the Jews had been converted to Christianity. St. Mary's was well known as a place which preached to Jews. It is, however, clear that not all Jewish people living in Whitechapel appreciated attempts to convert Jews to Christianity, and policing these tensions was one of the difficulties the H Division faced. However, the police themselves were not entirely exempt of a bias. anti-Semitism was known amongst the police. And in one court case, several policemen testified on different stories against a Jew, which led an ordinarily harsh judge to conclude none other than these police officers had been lying in order to slander the name of the Jewish community
Unfathomable.
due to their own anti-Semitism. I know, I would never be anti-Semitic. I'm a good policeman.
No.
No, no,
No.
no,
No, no, no.
no.
So,
His name was Mr. Lushington, a
Ah.
magistrate at Thames Police Court. He was known for letting people off lightly. He was not known for letting people off lightly. Dismissed the evidence against the 3 Jewish defendants. And he noted in particular that one policeman's story is very different from the others, which suggests that Lushington had detected an anti-Semitic bias in the testimony of at least one of the constables. So, what next?
Are there any other facts you know about Whitechapel that have not been said so far?
There are some other facts about Whitechapel. Which would you like to hear about?
I would like to hear more about
socialism and anarchism.
Socialism and anarchism, please.
Yes. These are 2 beliefs that amongst the lower and working classes were becoming ever more... Oh.
Ever more what?
Sorry, my... Oh. Sorry, is your ping going up?
No.
Sudden pipe.
Is this what happened in Whitechapel?
This is exactly what happened in Whitechapel. Sorry, give me a second. Oh!
Oh!
Oh no.
Is that what happened to Jack the Ripper's victims?
That is exactly what happens to Jack the Ripper's victims. I think we'll be back in a second.
Back online. I'm back. Continue, sire.
Sorry, sorry. It's still really late. Okay, hang about. Okay, we can find that.
Alright, let's go.
So, adding to the fears of criminal behaviour, worries about political ideas such as socialism and anarchism that these immigrants seem to bring with them, or which were stirred up by homegrown radical politicians.
Yes.
The Irish were targets of prejudice because of their Roman Catholic religion, but also because of the rise in Fenian, Irish nationalism.
I see.
At that time, the whole of Ireland was ruled by Britain, but many Irish people wanted at the least, home rule, and preferably independence. Armed protests in Ireland were increasing, and in 1884 a small bombing campaign led to an explosion on a train at Gower Street Station, and the discovery of a bomb left in Trafalgar Square. 2 other bombs did explode in the campaign, though there were only slight injuries to each.
Ah.
There had been a series of attempted assassinations and bomb attacks on the continent, which newspapers had labelled anarchist outrages. Anarchism was a revolutionary political idea which said that people would be better off without the government and without laws, and that left to their own devices, people would act honourably and kindly to one another. To the English press, this idea was very threatening. The idea of anarchism was developed by Russian revolutionaries, and some politicians emphasised the threat of Jewish immigration and Jewish radicalism from Eastern Europe. Some Jewish immigrants did bring radical political beliefs and set up socialist organisations such as the International Workers' Educational Club and a newspaper, the Aberta Front or Workers' Friend, and at a theatre just off Commercial Road in Whitechapel at Berners Street, now called Henrik Street.
Very nice.
Many people were already blaming the Ripper murders on a Jew when the body of Annie Chapman, the 3rd victim, was found in the yard of the Berners Street Theatre. Rumours were circulated and printed that Nikolai Vasiliev, a Russian anarchist Jew, was responsible for a string of similar murders in France and was now living in England, though it seems unlikely that this person even existed. Even though there was never a serious connection found between political anarchists and the Ripper murder, the police were worried that their ability to keep an eye on the activities of the Jews in Berners Street, especially as many of them were carried out in Yiddish, the language that many of the immigrants spoke.
I see.
So there you have it.
So,
you see, young prostitute, it's all intertwined.
Thank you, Police Officer Lord Cliff.
You are most welcome. But
I shall go back to my duties.
Yes, you will. And I have more police work to get back to. and you can discuss the workhouses whilst you're over there.
Okay.
Goodbye. Bye.
Goodbye.
The workhouses are in the other direction.
Oh, that. Oh,
Oh.
I was going to bed.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
here we are at the workhouse. So, Police Constable Lord Cliff. What happened in the workhouses?
You need to tell that part of the story.
Okay.
I'm a police officer.
Oh, so you've never been there, have you?
No.
Ah, well. In the workhouses, people who could not afford to get a job or buy a house, or people who preferred not to go into prostitution, were going to a workhouse, which essentially was where you work and do extremely laborious work, such as untying navy rope so that it can be retwined, which would be extremely painful for the fingers. And this would pay off with a roof over the head for the night and a piece of food, which was all not very good. And many people would rather die than go into a workhouse.
Families were segregated from their children and their wives or
Yes,
husbands.
indeed they were, Samuel Cliff. And, people were not very good in the workhouses, and they preferred to not be there. So that's what happened, basically.
Parents were allowed to see their children only once a day.
Indeed they were. And there we have it.
Okay.
We'll see you folks later in the next episode.